Thank you so very much. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be here. First and foremost, at the Rishihood University itself, when I studied about the, the program and everything, I was very impressed that a new paradigm is sort of coming forth in this, and hopefully this will be the engine to bring about a very much needed change in the academic world, because it has become very stagnant, in my view, across the globe. And so this should be the driving engine for that. And it's very much in the spirit of what Sri Aurobindo said. In a nutshell, if you want to say about Sri Aurobindo, it is all about call for action and transformation. So this is the sort of the very essence of it. And it is indeed a great honor and a privilege and a blessing, I would say, to be speaking on this very momentous occasion on Sri Aurobindo. And it is really a privilege to have been part of this journey. I recently just finished a chapter for Debashish Banerjee, edited volume, and the title of that was Life as Pilgrimage, and that is the sort of the integral yoga. So within some of the things that I have written, I will try to address today's talk, and I definitely need the blessings of the Mother. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Matru Rupena Samsita Namastasye 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 Namo Namaha. So, so Sri Aurobindo, first place when we take the very title of the my talk, which Sampaji gave, was Spiritualizing the Political. It implies a certain division between the political and the spiritual. But in reality, when we look at Sri Aurobindo's works, it is a continuous flow. It is a continuum. Whether we sense spirituality in his very early works in Vande Mataram and other works, and we sense even the political dimension, the social dimension, the aesthetic dimension. So it is so multi-layered, a great thinker like Sri Aurobindo, that we don't need to kind of separate this. So in his early, so what I will try to do today is to bring in some of my other works where Sri Aurobindo, appears. Sri Aurobindo is not somebody who just features in my bibliography. He is part of my biography. It is his. You stand on their shoulders and think. They give you. You enter that world. That world has precious ideas to offer. He's a great generator of ideas. His works are a condenser of a whole cultural memory. It is a repository of great ideas. So there is a multiple, and cleanser of unclean ideas too. So what Sri Aurobindo offers is this kind of a very vastness. Almost recently I gave a talk on Sri Aurobindo at Jadavpur just 1 week back, and the title of that was Dance of Words Under an Open Sky on an Uneven Earth. So, and I was trying to integrate what is my expertise technically, at least in the academic world, and that is Russian thinker. One is Mikhail Bakhtin. So Mikhail Bakhtin wrote considerably about what does it mean to live in an open-ended world? What does it mean to live in a dialogic world? Dialogue, democracy, openness, unfinalizability, these are the very cornerstones of living in a democratic society, and Mahabharata embodies that entire spirit. So I'll talk about the aesthetic, the authorship, and the, as Sampaji very rightly said, that what the role of whether it is an educator or whether it is a spiritual leader or whether it is, even a political leader, is not to take possession and sort of turn themselves into heroes, but rather it is to sort of suspend that whole sense of I-ness and empower the other. The other is not just a follower, but the other is actually should should be empowered in their own right. So whether we look at this in a very literary way, or in political matters, these are all very much the same, that stream, right? That lack of not asserting semantic authority and drawing the boundaries and dictating to the reader or to the subject or to anyone is really very problematic. And as you rightly pointed out, the job of a king, even if you have the power, don't abuse it, don't misuse it. You have to know when, where, and how, and why you must fight the battle that you ought to fight. So in very early on, I think last year or something, the filmmaker Vivek Agnihotri asked me a question. I wrote many of his reviews on his film. And he said, Lakshmi ji, why is it that India is at war with Bharat? Why is India at war with Bharat? So I said, okay, I need to think through this and write. And one is Bharat is an ancient civilization, and India is a nation state. One is timeless, anadi. The other is extremely sort of time-bound. And actually that itself is the problem, because when India established itself, it practically deracinated itself. It detached itself from that civilizational ethos, and it has big, so instead of a continuity, we are finding almost a combative kind of a relationship between India and Bharat, right? So I started this paper. It was published in Manushi. I said, he says this, I'm sure all of you know this, the foundations of Indian culture. He says, the right judgment of the life value of Indian philosophy is intimately bound up with the right appreciation of the life value of Indian religion. Religion and philosophy are too intimately one in this culture to be divided from each other. So when we look into the Western world, what is happening is that many want freedom from religion. And I would say that Sanatana Dharma gives freedom in religion. You don't need to be outside of it in order to find, a freedom. So for politics and for all various purposes, this sort of a continuity, right? So in none of Sri Aurobindo's works, we find a kind of a separation. That's why he's called the prophet of nationalism. Nationalism itself, there is an ocean of a difference between the sense that Sri Aurobindo pointed out. It is about devotion. It is about duty. It is about sacrifice. It is about the larger good of, nation. It is about finding out who we are. In the Western world, it has become very fashionable for people to send their DNA samples and go to ancestry.com and figure out where they come from. If our biological genome body has 25,000 to 30,000 genes cluster, right, in our genetic system, we also have a civilizational genome that we cannot separate ourselves from. We only know how to we can only know how to channel that, and how, as you rightly pointed out about Samaj, very beautifully etymologically you explain the very word of Samaj, that it is that unity, it is that driving force, and it is the equanimity, equality, samata, right? The other lecture that I gave at Jadavpur was laughter, God's stamp and seal on the siddhi of samata. So laughter is a very highly enlightening kind of a moment, because it is a true companion, a close companion of truth. So unless something is connected with that truth, satya, dharma and conventions are more flexible. They can be, because they change according to the spatio-temporal upheavals. But they also have to serve in the interest of Satya. That truth stays eternal. That cannot change, right? That is the ultimate, So when we separate ourselves from this kind of integral, very vastness of the cosmic truth, then we are falling into falsehood, right? Rigid ideologies. Ideology should be interpreted as social evaluation, which is integral to the very nature of interpretation. Philosophy cannot happen, or even interpretation, studying anything, understanding something is not like understanding is a cognitive activity and emotions is a work of the heart, and then judgment is another domain. No, they're all always integrated. We are in, the question is, where is the subtlety of Dharma coming in, from our ancient traditions? Where is this coming from? How do we sort of, navigate this open-ended world? So the other, since I said my expertise is on Mikhail Bakhtin, just to enhance the explanatory capability of Sri Aurobindo, because they share quite a bit in common. Both of them were incredibly fascinated with the incredible plenitude of differences. So earlier when I was talking with Sampaji, there is always that core, the anchoring point, which is the center of gravity. When the diverse elements are detached from this anchoring point, then it leads to falsehood, it leads to rigidity, it leads to fanaticism. All these are really grave dangers. So what Aurobindo is really talking about in all his varied works, any segment that you read in Savitri or Life Divine, life itself needs to be divinized, right? It is not enough to just for the consciousness to ascend, which is important and which is necessary, the ascent. But equally important is the application of what has been revealed, learnt, realized at the, for lack of better words, mountaintop. It needs to come to the plains, right? And it needs to sort of enter that. So at the end of Life Divine, he talks about triple transformation, right? There has to be that porous opening for the higher energy and forms to enter the system and then penetrate deeper and deeper. And it is not an easy task. There will be stiff resistance. As it goes deeper and deeper and into darkness, there is bound to be, at least the body will give you a lot of resistance for that. And so unless that opening happens, it cannot, evolve. It cannot transform. You cannot make life divine. So one of the books that I wrote, more from the Bakhtinian sense, and I do write quite a bit weave in Sri Aurobindo, is difference, dialogue, and development. So the premise of this book is that the reality of differences necessitates a dialogue. But just because it necessitates a dialogue, and when you don't respond to that call for dialogue, what happens is there is nothing that can happen, because in the culture, the monologic impulses, meaning the single-voiced, single determinant, these are all very problematic. Sri Aurobindo or even Bakhtin among the Western thinkers, or Nietzsche, they all celebrated that kind of incredible centrifugal and centripetal forces in culture. Culture by its very nature is heterogeneous. History by its very nature, because culture is heterogeneous, history is packed with contradictory forces. Always. It cannot be any other way. So he is not calling for some sort of a sanitized do this, to do and not to do kind of an manual for the political world. But rather what he is talking about is your eye should be on the truth, and knowing fully well about the murkiness of dialogue, and in the open-ended world, because dialogue is not something, we don't want to make it utopian. It is not a prescription. It is a process. Dialogue is both an indicator of development, and it is also the very method for development. So the methodology is very critical in all our, for that matter, one would say that The entire Sanatana Dharma itself is a methodology to find the truth. So even if you momentarily want to suspend God, because God complicates matters occasionally, particularly in our academic world, and therefore you try to kind of still utilize those methodologies in order to, whether it is the pursuit of science or whether it is the pursuit of humanities, because humanities and sciences must kind of converge, because there is art in science and there is science in art. And when that is kind of removed, then what happens is it becomes an empty phantom ideals. And that is exactly what Sri Aurobindo was sort of cautioning us against. Once you respond to that call of dialogue, I read entire Sri Aurobindo's works, whether it is Life Divine or Savitri, on these very multi-leveled manner. And that multi-leveled is, it is at once a great poetry, it is at once a great history, it is at once a great philosophy, it is at once a philological philosophy of language. He is, the reason that I earlier mentioned that the title, Dance of Words, is because Sri Aurobindo makes the words dance. And dance is a complete art form, because that is the nature of the Lord Shiva, Nataraja. That is what makes the whole world move. And so the same God who is the Lord of stillness, right, the yogi, Adi Yogi, is also the one who dances and makes the body move. And that, the stillness and movement, the combination, the intersection of it, is what actually Sri Aurobindo shows through his works. He takes a simple story from Mahabharata. See, I use it in order to, first place, Mahabharata and Sri Aurobindo's works, the subtleties of the Dharma, the complexities of the political world are both kind of, they parallel. And I use an expression from his poem, and this is so apropos to Mahabharata, which is that it outmeasures space, outlasts time. Outmeasures space and outlasts time. So it is Anadi, right? It is the great time. It is the Mahakal. Mahabharata itself is the Mahakal, and that Mahakal, for each and every moment in the historical time, it is responding to that. So the Mahakal doesn't just simply stay separate. It is all the time connected to the present world. So the mark of any great works, and the reason that these works have stood the test of time, is because their books, their words, they speak to every minute, every time. For so many decades, you open Savitri or Sri Aurobindo, any of his poems. At every time, in every reading, you find something new. You discover something new. You discover some kind of an exercise in imagination. Without that, it is impossible to, when you want to exert a kind of ugly control over the text, then you lose it. We have to, that is one of the things I think new modes of education and new pedagogy has to be very, very mindful of, which is that, when I wrote this book, that too in America, doing this work on Mahabharata in a psychology department was not so easy. But I was very fortunate to have an advisor and a group of, in the committee to say, okay, you are saying something interesting, and we will let you do that. Whereas in most PhD programs, there will be a professor who has a certain project, and all the students will be sort of advancing his. This is very problematic, because when the teacher, When we go back to Upanishads, I think you are better equipped, Sampathi, that itself is a dialogue, isn't it, between the teacher and the student. Through the dialogic consciousness, or our dialogue emerges through that kind of exchange, and that is how knowledge and reality we realize. It is not, Vedas are revelations, but Upanishads are, it is realized through this kind of dialogue. So dialogue, development, democracy, these are all very united, they're all very interrelated terms. They cannot exist without the other. So what does it mean to live in a completely open-ended society? I like to bring in from Bakhtin the concept of answerability. Answerability is very, very critical, where in any dialogue there has to be an active listening, and there has to be certain receptivity to divergent viewpoints. You don't need to agree with everybody, but you must at least give everyone a fair hearing, so to speak, because without that, dialogue cannot proceed. It is that diversity that will create, in a single consciousness, there is what is there to dialogue? You're only having a conversation with yourself. Only when there are multiple consciousnesses, then there is a scope for that movement. When you're talking about that movement, samajam, right? That's what you said. Mobility, right? To create that semantic mobility, we need that kind of dynamic force in order to be able to propel the, in that semiosphere, to be able to discover, new meanings and new, thoughts. So when we look, one of the beautiful things about Sri Aurobindo, I'm sorry, is not only reading Savitri is one kind of a delight, but reading letters on Savitri is another kind of a delight. And the reason is that in the letters on Savitri, he's actually responding to every question without just being very dismissive or anything. And he never says, he'll be very open and candid about it, but he's not dismissive about it. And what we discover in that is the very creative processes about receptivity. So there is I'm reading one of his letters. There is an invariable no invariable how except that I receive from above my head and receive changes and corrections from above without any initiation by myself or labor of brain. Even if I change 100 times, the mind does not work at that. It only receives. Formerly, it could not be to do so. The mind was always laboring at the stuff of the unchanged formation. The poem comes as a stream, beginning at the first, the line and the ending and the last. So the receptivity, making the mind porous, right, to allow. I worked on a chapter called Dancing in the Sky of Consciousness, and I write about the Bharatanatyam dancer, Malavika Sarukai. So she also talks about, dancers have to, with a finite body, right, with the fixed contours of the body, they have to suggest the infinite. In order to suggest, not represent, it is impossible to represent. It is left to that imagination to sort of point out, this is how the divine possibly is. And to do that, one must be able to sort of bring in and allow the cosmic dancer who is pouring his special gifts to his chosen subjects, so that this art form might continue and proceed. So she talks about any kind of dance production where she is sort of letting this higher power, enter your system, excuse me, so that so there is so much sadhana that goes on. No, I have water here. Thank you. There is so much sadhana that goes on in this invitation. You might have all the language. Sri Aurobindo also says, okay, you have the words, you have the grammar, you know how to string the words, but there is something much, much deeper. Deeper than just simply following the language. But see, language itself, whether it is words or in dance, the dance language, it is an open-ended system. It is an unfinalized system, right? Therefore, through that body, the language of the body, not the body is a fixed contour, but the language of the body is very open-ended, and that's why a dancer can suggest the infinite, through the dance form. Similarly, through the words too. So that is the reason that the word. So Sri Aurobindo all talks about how language itself has its own temperament, its own caprices. You can kind of play with the, in letters on, just one second, if I can find it, the actual quotation. Okay. I can't find it. So the language has its own sort of tendencies. It has an independent existence, unlike in the Western world, where language is only instrument in the hands of the individual. But for us, the Akshara Brahman, Shabda Brahman, these are all really, it has its own, so it is divine. Only because it is divine, it has its own playfulness. Because it is divine, it has its own grammar, it has its own structure, it has its own rules. We cannot violate that rules. So Sri Aurobindo says, only if you are the chosen subject of that Vakdevi, right, then you might be able to play with it. She might be graceful in accepting it. She might shower her grace in sort of acknowledging, because you're the chosen subject. So whether it is some, with people who can play with the language, they are able to kind of bend the certain rules in order to be able to let language. So that exception to the rule is, so in language there is always both the structure and the freedom. That freedom is not without the structure, not without conventions. So this is extremely critical, even in the political world, because since that is the topic today, is that for like how dialogue is it's very murky. It has a utopian element, but it is not utopian. It just has that, because it is government of the people, by the people, for the people. In order for that to kind of be strengthened, the activity must be from all sources, from the people also. I like to sort of, I write this in Mahabharata in my book, and this is also so true of Sri Aurobindo's entire political philosophy. And that is once, this is from an Italian thinker named Giambattista Vico. And Vico talks about, in the history of consciousness, so to speak, the first one is the theocratic world. The theocratic world is God is the puppeteer, and everybody is a puppet, and he moves the puppets at his will, and so that's one way of thinking. There we are at the mercy of just a higher power. The second, when it comes into the aristocratic world, the way the world is organized, or the way the consciousness even perceives the social order, is that it is the world of heroes and then the ordinary. Right? So that means that the hierarchical organization is already accepted. That is the sort of the world of aristocracy, right? From theocratic to aristocratic world, or monarchy, a king. But from that, you have to move towards the democratic world, where there is, the human. So it is through that collective democracy. Now, in democracy, there is irony that is very palpable. The irony is because in the democratic world, anyone with or without qualifications wants to become, wants to make claim to the throne. right? And it happens. That is the very nature of it. But what we sort of relinquish, and the murkiness and the chaos that comes with democracy is that gives you the scope for self-awareness, consciousness, the evolution of consciousness. And I'll sort of relate it to the evolution of in the history of consciousness itself. When we look at the whole avatars, but let's I'll for the moment go from Ramayana and Mahabharata. In Ramayana, the god comes as Nar, right? Narayan comes as Nar, and then he's setting a good example, and he adheres to in an unwavering manner to Dharma, to set a good example. Unwavering is not fanatical or dogmatic. It is just simply a commitment to certain, ideals, because you have to set an example. But from that, invariably, it had to come to the Dwapar Yuga, where Krishna he says, I am not a puppeteer. You have agency, you have free will, the humans, you have to fight your own battles. I will only give you all the materials to guide you how to fight that battle. But the battle must be done by you, and you have to take ownership of it. So that ownership is not just simply in the battlefield, but ownership also in the, if you extend that principle, it is also about interpretive act. How do you give meanings to something? We cannot engage in epistemic violence. So Sri Aurobindo also talks about how a kind of an fixed dogmatic ideal, no matter how noble it is, when that ideal is so, you're holding on to it in a fanatical manner, it invariably, sort of dogmatic ahimsa, becomes himsa. He's very, very clear about that. It is the indeterminacies, the multi-layeredness, and honoring nothing, no ideal can be decontextualized and dehistoricized. You have to, so the subtleties of Dharma that is there in Mahabharata, we find that also in Sri Aurobindo's works. After all, the very story of Savitri is taken from Vanaparva in Mahabharata. He takes that and sees that as a symbol of human evolution. So in that human evolution, there is, we arrive at that, not arrive, but it's a constant process of evolution. And in that, so reading Mahabharata is like entering a hall of mirrors, in every corner, and that hall of mirrors, we see ourselves seeing ourselves. So when we see ourselves seeing ourselves, that is a way, and the images are infinite, right? In those infinite images, because when there are mirrors all over, it is infinite images, we have to find that big self in that small self, right? That discovery is what is going to sort of allow us to ascend and also be receptive to the descending forces of the divine energy. So when Sri Aurobindo talks about that receptivity, he's also talking about just because you have created a work of art, that doesn't mean that you can finalize that and determine the meanings and dictate to the readers how to read that work. So even Bakhtin writes about author-hero relationship. Author and hero can be read on many levels, right? The creator and the created. The created has an independent voice in his or her own right. And the job of so Vyasa himself, the Mahabharata doesn't come to us, through the voice of Vyasa, right? It is narrated by Ugrasrava in Naimisha forest, where the sages are assembled, about what he heard, what Vaisampayana told, in the so it is the very structure of Mahabharata itself is very dialogic. And the dialogue par excellence is right in the middle of Mahabharata, that is Bhagavad Gita. And Sri Aurobindo not only sort of highlights that dialogue, his commentary itself is an incredible dialogue with Mahabharata, with Bhagavad Gita. In fact, I tried so much to visit the Alipur jail cell. I thought I needed some energy, but somehow the politics and the bureaucracy of the day did not permit me to do so. So the what Sri Aurobindo talks about is, one needs to dialogue with fate. Fate, destiny, or even, he says in book 2, Canto 2, cosmos is no accident in time. There is meaning in each play of chance. There is freedom in each phase of fate. Right? This is an incredibly powerful message to us, because very often we sort of succumb to the, to think that entire life is controlled by the powerful forces of fate, is to relinquish your agency, because the whole book of Sri Aurobindo is about how to be a karma yogi, right? It is a call for action. It is a call for guided by certain principles, and guided by, that is the reason that Sri Aurobindo practically revived and recovered while his life began as a freedom movement for the country, he went beyond the country and said, I have to go and recover Bharat, the greatness of Bharat. And that is what needs to be sort of brought to the forefront. Without that, all this just simply freedom is not going to. So today we need Sri Aurobindo in every realm of our life, whether it is in the spiritual pursuit, or whether it is, and actually we should not be separating the spiritual from the political, or from the epistemological, or from the academic, rigorous, academic endeavors, because they're all one and the same. Because the whole purpose of life divine, the very is to divinize, to bring the divine forces. In fact, Mother talks about cellular transformation. Even the body's cells need to be in a kind of a dialogue and to live in harmony, because there are so many. So whether we look at it even biologically or on a cosmic plane, the issues are the same, because that's why I said about the genome body. There are the classes, how the genomes express, about the genes in the genome body express themselves, has also to do with the surrounding genes and also the environmental conditions, epigenetics. So similarly, when I say dialogue, the dialogues of the title that I've given to my book on the Mahabharata is Dialogics of Self, the Mahabharata and Culture. And why do I say? Because one requires a kind of a dialogic consciousness to be able to invite the other. Right? A divergent other. Divergent other doesn't necessarily mean, I'll get to that in a minute. So you have to develop that dialogic consciousness. The text need to be dialogic. Right. So in Mahabharata, nowhere, although quite literally and figuratively, Vyasa is the author, so to speak. But we don't hear, it is not coming directly from Vyasa to us. Most of us, we got it from our grandmothers or somebody at home, while feeding us, they told us stories, and we cried and we laughed and we got angry and we got agitated. And that is how the story has been internalized. And culture. So culture means if one might have a dialogic consciousness, a text might very well be dialogic, but if cultural conditions are very monologic and rigid, rigid, and that is what I think today is happening. Those monologic impulses have taken over across the globe. So, which means you have to create conditions collectively for the dialogue to come. And it is really my very firm belief, not belief, I feel strongly that long before all this dialogue and multi-pluralism and all this become fashionable words in the Western world, the Indian intellectual traditions dealt with dialogue in a far, far deeper way, at a philosophical level, at an social level, at an even at the philological levels, on so many levels. And that's why right now I'm working on a book called Language, Reality and Laughter. Hasya is a very powerful moment of enlightenment. Laughter is a close companion of truth, and that close companion of the truth. So truth is what is the must be honored, and rather than everything else that might be very time bound, often falsehood might run its course, but it is the ultimate truth that matters most. So the one must arrive at the point. This is from the excerpt from the book. What time? Oh, how is the time? Sure. Fine. I'll just, because this is a very beautiful passage from the book of Everlasting Day, because eternity multiplied its vast self-look, translating its endless mightiness and joy into delights souls playing with time could share. Playing with time could share. See how beautiful that is. So you are, because time is the ultimate arbiter of truth. It is the most judicious, Kala Brahman. Kala can tell you. Kala can let the falsehood part run its course, but it'll preserve the truth and displace it at the moment chosen by it. In grandiose, ever newborn from the unknown depths, in powers that leaped immortal from unknown heights, in passionate heartbeats of an undying love, in scenes of sweetness that can never fade, immortal of the rapturous heart and eyes, in serene arches of translucent calm, from wonders dream vast, cloudless skies slid down, an abyss of sapphire, sunlight visited eye, which suffered without pain the absolute ray and saw the immortal clarities of form. I think in this kind of endeavor to the best way to celebrate and honor Sri Aurobindo is for each of us to be able to answer to, there is a concept called a super addressee. Yeah? So there is the presence of the super addressee in everything that we talk and we do, because that is the way we answer to that. And the way to honor Sri Aurobindo is to sort of bring his incredible insights into that life and into our education system, into the politics, so that the teacher is not controlling the student's mind, the politician, the leader is not controlling the subjects, right? And even the creator is not asserting his own creation. And the best example for that comes from Shiva. Shiva, when, because outsideness is a very powerful factor, and when, you mentioned Pranava, so when Kartikeya, the precocious son, says, I will explain what Pranava is, you can't do that. So Shiva says, okay, I'll kneel in front of you. That's why one of the names for Kartikeya is Swaminathan, the Lord of Lord. So he kneels before his own son and takes the lesson. So that is a very powerful way of looking at the relationship between the creator and the created. That is exactly what you see in when Sri Aurobindo writes, whether it is Life Divine or any of his incredible works. That is the call that he did for so many decades as to how Bharat should be. And that Bharat has to be dialogic, and it is very much in the DNA, and we cannot be detached from that, important DNA. Thank you so very much.